Justice doesn't bring back the dead, but for Connie Bennett, it's brought a sliver of peace after decades of unimaginable heartbreak. It's been over 30 years since her life was shattered by one of Colorado's most chilling crimes, a crime that shook an entire community to its core. The Bennett family, a picture of love and happiness, was brutally torn apart in a single horrifying night. Bruce Bennett, his wife Deborah, and their 7-year-old daughter Melissa were mercilessly murdered in their home. Only 3-year-old Vanessa, clinging to life despite severe injuries, survived the carnage. The details of this case, unspeakable violence, a twisted killer, and years of unanswered questions, turned it into one of the state's darkest mysteries. But today, we're diving into how justice was finally served. This is the story of the Bennett family massacre and the 34-year journey to uncover the truth. Before tragedy turned their lives into a dark chapter in Colorado's history, the Bennett family was a picture of happiness, resilience, and love. Living in Aurora, Colorado, Bruce and Deborah Bennett had built a life full of promise, centered around their 2 daughters, Melissa and Vanessa. They weren't just a family, they were a symbol of hope and the simple beauty of everyday life. Bruce Bennett, born on April 22, 1956, grew up in Denver, Colorado with his 2 brothers. He was the kind of person many would describe as dependable, hardworking, and devoted to those he loved. After graduating high school, Bruce joined the Navy, serving as a sonar analyst stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. There he worked with cutting-edge technology, a role that reflected his sharp mind and attention to detail. But Bruce's service wasn't just about career, it was about building a stable future for the family he dreamed of. After completing his time in the Navy, Bruce set his sights on becoming an air traffic controller. It was a demanding path requiring rigorous training and study, but Bruce was determined to succeed. He also worked at the family's furniture distribution business, splitting his time between providing for his loved ones and pursuing his dreams. Then there was Deborah. Her story was one of resilience and strength. She was forced to grow up quickly after losing her mother at a young age. With her father, a war veteran, often absent, Deborah became the backbone of her family, taking on the role of caregiver for her younger siblings. Life was far from easy, but Deborah's determination carried her through. She moved to Colorado with her family, where her brother Larry introduced her to Bruce. The connection was instant. Bruce and Deborah fell in love quickly and built a relationship rooted in trust, partnership, and shared dreams. They married in the 1970s and started their family soon after. Their first daughter, Melissa, was born in January 1976, bringing boundless joy into their lives. Then, 5 years later, Vanessa arrived, completing their family of 4. Bruce and Deborah were devoted parents who poured their hearts into creating a happy home for their girls. By 1983, the family had saved enough money to buy their first house in Aurora, a cozy home filled with laughter, love, and the dreams they worked so hard to achieve. Bruce balanced his studies and work while Deborah focused on raising their daughters, creating an environment where Melissa and Vanessa could thrive. Melissa was almost 8 years old in January 1984, a bright and curious child who was adored by everyone who met her. She loved her family deeply and had a special bond with her little sister Vanessa, a bubbly and playful 3-year-old who brought endless joy into their home. January 15, 1984, started as a day of celebration for the Bennett family. The house was filled with laughter and love as they gathered to honor Melissa's upcoming 8th birthday. But as the sun rose the next morning, their home in Aurora, Colorado became the scene of an unimaginable nightmare. When Bruce and Deborah didn't show up for work at the family's furniture store, alarm bells began to ring. Calls to their home went unanswered. Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, decided to check on her son's family, fearing that something might be wrong. As she pulled into their driveway, Connie noticed something strange. The garage door was still open, just as it had been the night before. She walked into the house, calling out for Bruce, Deborah, and the kids. But instead of the warm greeting she expected, she was met with a sight that would haunt her forever. At the base of the stairs lay Bruce Bennett, her son, in a pool of blood. His head was brutally battered, and his throat had been slashed in what could only be described as overkill. Connie's heart sank as she rushed to find help, but the horrors inside the house were far from over. In the master bedroom, Deborah's body was discovered. Like Bruce, she had been viciously beaten, her head caved in by repeated blows. The violence was so severe that it left no question about the killer's intentions. In the children's room, the unimaginable continued. Little Melissa, just days shy of her 8th birthday, was found beaten, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. Her small body was partially covered by a blanket, a chilling and disturbing detail that hinted at the twisted mind of the perpetrator. Yet amidst all the horror, there was one faint glimmer of hope. In the same room, 3-year-old Vanessa was found alive, though barely. She had suffered severe injuries. Her jaw was shattered, her skull fractured, and her tiny body bore the marks of unspeakable violence. She was clinging to life, but her survival was nothing short of miraculous. Emergency responders arrived quickly, rushing Vanessa to the hospital while investigators began combing through the crime scene. What they found painted a picture of a calculated, monstrous attack. Deborah's purse was found tossed in the snow outside, its contents rifled through, suggesting robbery might have been a motive. Nearby footprints and blood revealed an unfamiliar boot print, evidence that didn't belong to anyone in the family. One crucial piece of evidence, however, was missing: the murder weapon. Investigators determined that a hammer was likely used to deliver the savage blows, but it was nowhere to be found. The once vibrant Bennett home, filled with laughter and life just hours earlier, had been transformed into a scene of unspeakable violence. For the detectives on the case, this was no ordinary crime. This was the work of someone driven by more than just greed, someone with a level of brutality that shook even the most seasoned investigators. As news of the murder spread, the community was gripped by fear. Who could commit such a heinous act? And why the Bennetts? The answers wouldn't come for decades, but the scars left by that fateful night would never fade. As horrifying as the Bennett family massacre was, it was not an isolated tragedy. In the weeks leading up to that fateful January night, a series of brutal, calculated attacks shook Colorado, leaving residents living in fear and investigators scrambling to connect the dots. These earlier crimes, while eerily similar, hinted at a predator who was not just dangerous, but escalating in both violence and depravity. The wave of terror began on January 4th, 1984, just 11 days before the Bennett murders. In Aurora, Kimberly and James, a young couple, were spending a quiet evening at home. Kimberly was in the bedroom, while James was working on a music recording in another room. For them, it was just another ordinary night, until the unimaginable happened. Out of the shadows, an intruder entered their home through an open garage door. Armed with a hammer, he crept through the house until he found Kimberly. Without warning, he struck her in the head, leaving her dazed and bleeding. But Kimberly managed to let out a scream, an act of defiance that would save their lives. Hearing her cries, James rushed to her side, only to be met with the same vicious weapon. The attacker struck him in the skull with the hammer, but James, despite his injuries, fought back. His determination forced the intruder to flee into the night, leaving behind a trail of terror. Kimberly and James survived, but they would carry the physical and emotional scars of that night forever. Police investigating the scene found the hammer the attacker used in footprints in the snow leading away from the house. Yet, the trail went cold quickly. Despite their best efforts, detectives were unable to find any solid leads. Then, just 6 days later, on January 10th, the violence escalated. This time, the victim was Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old interior decorator living in Lakewood, Colorado. Patricia was known for her grace, kindness, and success in her field. She had spent her day running errands and enjoying lunch, seemingly unaware that she was being stalked by a predator. When Patricia returned home, the killer struck. Inside her living room, she was attacked with a hammer, suffering 17 brutal blows to her head. Her body was later found partially covered by a child's blanket, and evidence at the scene revealed clear signs of sexual assault. After taking her life, the intruder rummaged through her belongings, stealing money from her purse before fleeing into the night. The details of Patricia's murder were chilling, but it wasn't the only attack that day. That very evening, in another part of Colorado, Donna, a flight attendant for Frontier Airlines, was attacked in her own garage. Donna had just returned home, parked her car, and was unloading groceries when the predator struck. A hammer came crashing down on her head, knocking her unconscious. Hours later, her partner Ron returned home to find a horrifying scene, a trail of blood leading from the garage to their bedroom. Donna, severely injured, had somehow managed to crawl to safety. Ron immediately called for help, and Donna was rushed to the hospital. She had suffered severe head trauma, but by some miracle she survived. Police investigating the scene found a bloodied hammer in Donna's car, but as with the other attacks, the killer left no fingerprints. Donna would later recall nothing of the attack, as her injuries caused significant memory loss. By mid-January, detectives were beginning to piece together a horrifying pattern. Each attack began with the intruder entering through an open garage door. A hammer was consistently used as the weapon of choice, delivering violent, often fatal blows. Victims were either sexually assaulted or subjected to attempts of assault. After the violence, the intruder stole small items, typically cash or valuables from purses. The brutality of these crimes sent shockwaves through the communities of Aurora and Lakewood. Residents began locking their doors religiously, securing their garages, and taking precautions they had never considered necessary before. But as cautious as people became, no one could have predicted the horror that was yet to come. On January 15th, just days after Patricia Smith's murder and Donna's assault, the predator struck again. This time it was the Bennett family who fell victim to his twisted spree. The similarities were undeniable, but this attack was far more devastating, cementing his reputation as one of Colorado's most terrifying criminals. As investigators would later discover, these earlier crimes weren't just random acts of violence. They were a chilling prelude to the unimaginable brutality that would claim the lives of Bruce, Deborah, and little Melissa Bennett, and leave 3-year-old Vanessa fighting for her life. After the shocking series of attacks in January 1984, the Colorado community was gripped with fear, and police were left with one burning question: who was behind these monstrous crimes? Investigators poured every available resource into solving the case. But the tools they had in the 1980s were a far cry from the forensic advancements we know today. DNA analysis, now considered a cornerstone of criminal investigations, was in its infancy. Detectives collected what evidence they could: bloody footprints, hair fibers, and clothing from the victims. But without the ability to process this material with modern techniques, the trail went cold. One particularly devastating setback occurred in the early 1990s when investigators discovered a single blonde pubic hair at one of the crime scenes. Believing this could be the key to identifying the killer, they sent it for specialized testing. But the available technology wasn't sophisticated enough, and tragically, the hair was destroyed in the process, leaving them no closer to solving the case. Despite these challenges, investigators didn't give up. They meticulously preserved the evidence, knowing that one day advancements in forensic science might give them a second chance. Fast forward to 2001, a breakthrough moment in the investigation. Forensic DNA technology had significantly evolved, allowing investigators to re-examine the materials they had carefully stored for nearly 2 decades. When the DNA from the crime scenes was fully analyzed, it provided a critical piece of the puzzle. For the first time, authorities had a complete DNA profile of the killer. This was a monumental step forward. It meant they could now compare the profile to potential suspects with absolute certainty. Yet despite this incredible progress, there was one major obstacle. The profile didn't match anyone in existing databases. The killer had managed to stay out of law enforcement's reach for years. It was a bittersweet moment for the detectives who had spent countless hours on the case. They were closer than ever to identifying the perpetrator, but without a match, the DNA was like a key with no lock. Even so, this breakthrough gave investigators renewed hope. They knew they were on the right track, and with every technological advance, the odds of catching the killer improved. They continued to build their case, preserving evidence and reviewing old leads, determined to find justice for the victims and their families. It was a waiting game, one that would last another 2 decades. The case remained open, haunting the minds of investigators and keeping the families of the victims in limbo. But as the saying goes, justice delayed is not justice denied. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. For over 3 decades, the Bennett family massacre haunted the minds of investigators and the hearts of the victims' loved ones. It seemed as though justice would never come. But in 2018, a breakthrough brought the case back into the spotlight. And this time it was different. Detectives turned to an emerging tool that was reshaping how cold cases were solved: genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge method went beyond traditional criminal databases. It allowed investigators to upload DNA from the Bennett crime scene to genealogy platforms that contain profiles from everyday people searching for family connections. The goal? To identify relatives of the killer and work backward to uncover their identity. The process wasn't easy. The DNA didn't lead directly to a suspect, but instead to distant family matches. Piece by piece, a genealogist mapped out potential family trees, narrowing down the possibilities with meticulous precision. After weeks of analysis, a key name surfaced: Alex Ying. Born on August 14, 1960, Alex Ying had a long history of criminal behavior and a troubled past that aligned disturbingly well with the profile of the Bennett family's killer. Alex grew up in North Carolina, where his life was marked by instability and brushes with the law from an early age. He dropped out of high school after the 10th grade, claiming he was expelled for excessive drinking. This set the stage for a life of drifting and petty crimes. By his late teens, he was already bouncing between juvenile detention centers, foster homes, and a series of arrests for theft and burglary. By the early 1980s, Alex had settled in Colorado, working as a laborer on construction sites in Aurora and Lakewood, the exact areas where the attacks occurred. His work gave him easy access to neighborhoods, tools, and homes that were often vulnerable. What made Alex particularly dangerous was his pattern of escalating violence. Investigators discovered that after the Bennett family murders, Alex didn't stop. In January 1984, just weeks after the massacre, he attacked another man in Arizona with a heavy granite rock, nearly killing him. Alex was arrested shortly after, but managed to evade any connection to the Colorado crimes at the time. The DNA evidence from the Bennett crime scene, however, told a different story. When investigators compared it to Alex Ying's profile, the results were undeniable. It was a perfect match. This breakthrough was monumental. After 34 years of unanswered questions, investigators finally had the name and face of the man responsible for the Bennett family's tragedy, and possibly other unsolved crimes. But Alex's trail of violence didn't end with his arrest in Arizona. Records revealed a chilling series of offenses that followed his 1984 detention, including another brutal attack during an attempted escape. Yet through all of this, he had managed to stay under the radar for his earlier crimes in Colorado. In July 2018, armed with a DNA match and a mountain of circumstantial evidence, a team of Colorado detectives traveled to Nevada, where Alex Ying was serving a lengthy prison sentence. They approached Alex carefully, framing their questions around his past and work history. Alex spoke openly at first, discussing his childhood, his time in Colorado, and his construction jobs in Aurora and Lakewood. But when detectives presented him with photos of Patricia Smith and the Bennett family, Alex's demeanor shifted. His calm facade cracked as he denied knowing the victims. When shown graphic images of Patricia Smith's crime scene, Alex became visibly shaken, abruptly asking for a lawyer. This moment, combined with the DNA evidence, was the final confirmation investigators needed. The man who had terrorized Colorado in 1984, taking the lives of Bruce, Deborah, Melissa, and Patricia Smith, had finally been identified. Alex Ying, a man who had lived in relative obscurity, hiding behind the limitations of forensic science, was now undeniably tied to the crimes. Justice was finally within reach. After decades of pain, unanswered questions, and tireless investigation, the time had come for Alex Ying to face the consequences of his actions. The man who had evaded justice for so long is now at the center of two high-profile trials that would finally bring closure to the families of his victims. The first trial began in 2021, focusing on the Bennett family murders. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming case built on decades of work and the undeniable power of DNA evidence. The DNA from the Bennett crime scene matched Alex Ying's profile perfectly, placing him at the scene of the massacre. Prosecutors also drew chilling parallels between the Bennett murders and the murder of Patricia Smith, as well as the other hammer attacks in Colorado. In both cases, the killer entered through open garages, used a hammer as the weapon, and sexually assaulted the victims. The prosecution's case painted a vivid picture of Alex Ying as a cold, calculating predator. They emphasized how his violent spree shattered the lives of multiple families, leaving behind scars that would never heal. The defense, in an attempt to discredit the evidence, argued that the DNA samples had been mishandled due to the decades-long investigation. They also pointed to the lack of fingerprints at the scenes, suggesting that someone else could have committed the crimes. But the prosecution countered every argument. They explained that the DNA evidence was solid and had been verified multiple times using advanced modern techniques. As for the lack of fingerprints, they suggested that Alex Ying, who had experience working with tools and construction materials, likely wore gloves to avoid leaving behind evidence. The most emotional moment of the trial came when Connie Bennett, Bruce's mother, took the stand. With trembling hands, she recounted the horror of discovering her son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter brutally murdered in their own home. Her testimony brought the courtroom to tears, reminding everyone of the devastating human cost of Alex Ying's actions. After several days of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury deliberated. It didn't take long for them to reach a verdict. Alex Ying was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as related charges of robbery and sexual assault. The sentence? 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. For the Bennett family and their loved ones, it was a long overdue moment of justice. But Alex's reckoning wasn't over. In 2002, he stood trial for the murder of Patricia Smith, whose brutal death had haunted her family for decades. Once again, prosecutors presented a strong case, relying heavily on the DNA evidence found at Patricia's crime scene. They also highlighted the striking similarities between Patricia's murder and the Bennett family massacre. Both involved an intruder entering through an open garage, attacks with a hammer, and sexual assault. This time, Alex's defense team attempted a different strategy. They requested a mental competency evaluation, hoping to delay the trial. But the evaluation found Alex fit to stand trial and proceedings moved forward. The trial for Patricia Smith's murder was no less emotional than the first. Her family shared heartbreaking stories of who Patricia was, a loving mother, grandmother, and friend whose life was stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty. As with the Bennett trial, the evidence left no room for doubt. Alex Ying was found guilty once again and sentenced to another life sentence. In total, Alex Ying now faces 4 consecutive life sentences, ensuring that he will spend the rest of his days behind bars, never again able to harm another soul. For the families of Bruce, Deborah, Melissa, Patricia, and the other survivors of Alex's attacks, these trials brought a bittersweet form of closure. While no sentence could ever bring back their loved ones or erase the pain, justice had finally been served. It took decades, but the persistence of law enforcement, advancements in forensic science, and the unwavering courage of the victims' families ensured that Alex Ying's crimes did not go unanswered. And in the end, justice prevailed. Amid the horrors of the Bennett family massacre, there was one glimmer of hope. 3-year-old Vanessa, the sole survivor of that tragic night. But Vanessa's survival was not without cost. Her journey over the next 3 decades was one of unimaginable pain, resilience, and the lifelong struggle to heal wounds that can never truly be erased. Vanessa suffered severe physical injuries that night. Her jaw was shattered, her skull fractured, and her tiny body bore the trauma of violence no child should ever endure. Doctors worked tirelessly to save her life, calling her survival nothing short of a miracle. But while her body began to heal, the emotional scars ran far deeper. Growing up without her parents or older sister, Vanessa faced a reality shaped by loss and trauma. The knowledge of what had happened to her family haunted her, even as she tried to move forward. Over the years, the weight of that night manifested in depression, PTSD, and struggles with addiction. For Vanessa, the memories of her childhood were tied not to innocence, but to the violence and grief that forever altered her world. For many years, Vanessa felt lost. She battled the pain through self-destructive behaviors, trying to numb the anguish that seemed too vast to overcome. But despite the darkness, there was a spark of resilience within her. With time and support, Vanessa began to rebuild her life. She sought help to confront her trauma, and though the process was grueling, she gradually found strength in her survival. She worked to turn her pain into purpose, determined not to let the events of that night define the rest of her life. In interviews, Vanessa admitted that finding the killer didn't bring her peace. "It's a wound that will never fully heal," she said. "Justice doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't bring my family back. The damage was already done." Vanessa's story is one of survival, but also a reminder of the long-lasting impact of violence. She is living proof of the strength of the human spirit, but her journey is also a testament to the lifelong ripple effects of tragedy. Though she has rebuilt her life, Vanessa has made it clear that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to carry it. Today, she shares her story not to relive the pain, but to honor the memory of her family and to show others that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, there is a path forward. And so, after more than 3 decades, justice has finally been served for the Bennett family, for Patricia Smith, and for the countless lives forever altered by Alex Ying's reign of terror. With 4 life sentences handed down, Alex Ying will spend the rest of his days behind bars, ensuring that he can never harm another soul. But justice, as powerful as it is, can undo the devastation left behind. For the families of Bruce, Deborah, Melissa, Patricia, and the other victims, the scars of those dark days will never fully fade. Survivors like Vanessa Bennett carry the weight of these crimes every day, proof that while justice may bring resolution, it can never bring complete peace. This case raises an important question. Was a life sentence enough? Should Alex Ying, a man whose crimes spanned years and claimed multiple lives, have faced a harsher punishment? Or does the certainty of his permanent imprisonment ensure justice is truly served? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment or send us a message. What do you think justice looks like in a case like this? And if this story moved you, if it left you wanting to explore more of the dark truths behind true crime, please consider subscribing to our podcast. Each week, we dive deep into the cases that shock, terrify, and captivate, bringing you the stories behind the headlines and the people forever changed by them. Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the truth behind one of Colorado's most haunting cases.